All right, welcome back. You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Live look at the White House as we learned today that President Trump is sending envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Pakistan in order to continue talks with Iran on Saturday. The pair is going to meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. But the Iranians say that they will not be meeting face-to-face with the Americans. They say that the Pakistanis will be basically relaying messages between the two parties in order to get through these discussions. National security analyst, retired Marine intelligence officer, and host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer, here with me to discuss. And Hal, one thing that we talk about in the newsroom sometimes, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious about this, is does it matter whether or not parties actually meet face-to-face or whether or not they're in separate rooms? Does that change the dialogue that happens in these negotiations?
I think it's very important that they can. Part of it, there is a saying that about 80% or more of communication is nonverbal. It's body language, and we do it intuitively. We don't even realize we do it, but it's reading people's facial expressions, how they hold themselves. Their breathing, all sorts of things tell you indicate whatever you're saying, how receptively it's being received, whether you're making progress. And the problem is when you're going back and forth through an interlocutor, the interlocutor may be a very good read, but you're never going to get the same read. Now, one of the things I would say with Field Marshal Munir, who is pretty much the main interlocutor on this, the Pakistani military head, is he can probably read things from a cross-cultural standpoint and from a personal standpoint from the Iranians that we may not pick up. I don't think that Jared Kushner or Steve Witkoff will necessarily pick up on some of those things. So in that way, it may enhance it a little bit, but certainly in person, being there, sitting at the same table, that usually is better.
So Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff on their way to Pakistan. What's their main goal going into the weekend?
That's a really good question. Everybody's been asking that, which is, are they going to meet with them? If they're not going to meet with them, why are they going there? And we had actually, the president had set out that we had to have a comprehensive proposal before we would meet with them again. I have heard nothing about a comprehensive proposal. In fact, this trip that coincides with Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi's arrival in Islamabad, for him, this is one of 3 or 4 stops. He's got other countries he's going to. He's going to eventually end up in Moscow as part of this thing, but he's stopping in Islamabad. So he's actually going to multiple locations. And for us, we're sending Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner on this one trip that I'm aware of. Maybe they're going to do an after-action thing with our Pakistani counterparts and say, well, what do you think they were talking about? It's really difficult to know, but I think we're trying to get them back to the negotiating table. But we are kind of violating the premise we set forth, which was they have to have a comprehensive proposal. And I have not heard anything like that. If there is one, they're keeping it very, very quiet.
So far, how do we assess the Pakistanis' role as mediator in this war? Has it been a successful mediation to this point?
I think they've done a pretty good job. I'm actually pretty impressed. They managed to get the ceasefire for all of its flaws. They managed to get the ceasefire going. There were some definite issues when the Pakistani prime minister said that Lebanon was part of the deal. And of course, Israel came out immediately and said, no, it's not part of the deal. Then President Trump came out and said, no, it's not part of the deal. And it was only when it was really part of the deal that you saw the big shift take place with the Iranians. They said, we're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. That was a very short-lived thing because they turned around and shut down the Strait of Hormuz right after they said they were going to open it. But they were obviously trying to link it in their mind. So in that regard, I don't know if that was, I still to this day, I don't know if that was a mistake by the Pakistanis. Maybe they misinterpreted, or it was something that maybe was part of the deal that we later decided was not part of the deal. I'm just not quite sure what exactly happened there. But overall, I think they've done a very good job. And of course, they've also traveled to Tehran, something that we would not be able to send, at least at this time. I can't imagine us being able to send our own negotiators to Tehran at this point. So, but they have been able to go over there and meet with the Iranians on their home turf, and that makes a big difference.
So, when this war started, we had a lot of questions about the direction that things would go, how far it would escalate. Now, the discussion has more turned into, will this ceasefire hold? Have you seen any indicators so far that tell you, everybody's saying the word fragile with this ceasefire, but is there any indicators to tell us what direction that fragility is headed in? Is it growing more fragile as the days go by, or are things remaining relatively calm while the peace talks are ongoing?
I would call it an actively engaged ceasefire, if you want to say that. We're maintaining a naval blockade. We're stopping their ships. We even fired on one of their ships and seized it. They've been seizing ships. They fired on a ship. It's a ceasefire that has some flashpoints constantly throughout. The Iranians are probably, reportedly, maybe deploying mines, and we have turned around and said if we see any of their boats out there deploying mines, we're going to basically take them under fire right away. So it's a ceasefire for certain things, but not everything. And certainly on the water, the ceasefire seems to be less a ceasefire than more of an active engagement in certain ways. It kind of reminds me a little bit of World War II, where the Germans did the Blitzkrieg and swept west, and then they had what was called the Sitzkrieg, where everybody was just sitting around. The war was there, but there wasn't a lot of movement. Maybe we're now in a little bit of a mini Sitzkrieg, in that we're not firing missiles and drones at each other's cities, and we're not flying airstrikes at Iranian cities, but there still is a lot of active elements of this conflict underway, even though there's ostensibly a ceasefire in place.
So, how much patience does the White House have? They say that they've extended this ceasefire an undetermined amount of time. They didn't say that the ceasefire has been extended by X amount of days or weeks or anything like that. They just said, we're going to extend it while the Iranians work on a proposal for us to receive. My understanding is they haven't received that proposal yet. How much patience does the White House have, and how long can go by before the White House decides, okay, the fighting has to start again. We have not gotten what we want?
I think we'll probably sit here for maybe a couple, 3 more weeks before you see real pressure. One of the things that's happening is the Iranian economy is really in free fall. The purchase price, what people can do to buy food and stuff, has dropped 90%. 90%. I'm hearing triple digit inflation with certain commodities over in Iran. These are necessities for life that people can't afford. And so this is all happening. Their currency is bottoming out. They're having all kinds of problems. They can't really export oil. They can't import anything. And it's within weeks, probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, they have to stop pumping oil. They have to shut down all their oil fields because they have no place to store that oil. They're completely out. In fact, they just brought a mothball tanker out of mothballs just to fill it up with full of oil because they filled all their ground storage tanks. So they are having serious economic problems, and I think our strategy is that we look back, we look at December, January, it was the economy that got people out there on the streets. Now, it was the government that killed about 45,000 protesters. So it's pretty horrific. But we're looking at saying, if we're going to see regime change, if we're going to see a real end to this thing, maybe we need to really focus on just keeping the economic pressure in place. So I think that will really guide the president in terms of how long he wants to keep this going.
How would you define Iran's leverage in these discussions?
They have some, but I read some stuff where there's some estimates on Iran controls the strait and Iran does this, and it's like they control some things. Certainly, they're major problem in the strait, but they don't have what they had before. They can't project power like they were, and I just not really seeing Iran having the influence that they had across the region. Now, one thing is happening is I'm seeing the Shiite militias up in Iraq are still actively engaging. I think they just fired on a Kuwaiti border post, as I recall, just a day ago. So they're very much engaged. But this is playing. It's kind of multi-level chess. We got Iran, but we also have the Houthi, or the not the Houthis down in Yemen. We have Hezbollah and what's going on there with Israel, and then we have the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all of this is part of this big mix of trying to get the Iranians to cut off support to all these proxies and to end these other conflicts as well. So they have some degree of power influence, but it's not what it was at the beginning of the war.
Hal Kempfer is a retired Marine intelligence officer and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Thanks, Austin.
Bet. All right. Time for us to hit another quick commercial break, as we still got our live vantage points of Beirut, the time in Lebanon and in Israel, just past 2:30 in the morning. There's Tel Aviv. We'll be right back.